Hiya folks. Integrating generative AI into your applications can enable some capabilities that would be difficult or even impossible otherwise. But you won't get very far in your journey with generative AI before you start wondering, how can I test this stuff? One of the key features of generative AI is that it typically doesn't generate the same responses for the same inputs. This makes the responses feel more alive and real and less canned and robotic, but it also makes it difficult to test. The non-deterministic nature of generative AI means that there's no such thing as an assert equals when testing generative AI code. While you can write tests up to the point that it makes the request and get back the response, you can't easily verify that the prompts you are sending to the LLM are producing the kind of results you're expecting. In this video, I'm going to show you a way to test your generative AI applications using Spring AI evaluators. Evaluators let you actually make assertions against the responses you get back to make sure that they meet certain criteria. Specifically, we're going to look at Spring AI's Relevancy Evaluator, but we'll discuss other types of evaluations as well. So if you're ready to see how to test your Spring AI applications, then let's get started. If you've ever seen me do any talks on Spring AI, you've ever watched any of my other videos, or if you've started reading the first few chapters of Spring AI in Action, you already know how I typically start these videos. I'm going to start them by creating a very simple Spring AI project. Now, we could create something more complex. We could do that. I have written evaluation tests against more complex scenarios than this, but really no point in going really too crazy with this, because the evaluation tests work pretty much the same regardless. All right, with that said, I'm going to create a brand new project. We're going to call this Evaluator, helps if I could type, Evaluator Demo is a good name. I don't have to have Java 21, but I just like to have Java 21, so I'm going to go ahead and pick that. I'm going to pick two basic dependencies. I'm going to pick OpenAI. You could pick, if you want, you could pick any of the other options out there. You could pick, Gemini. You could work with Anthropic or whatever you want to use. I'm just going to go with OpenAI today. Going to go ahead and create that. And I forgot to add the web dependency. So let's go ahead and add that. I clicked go a little too fast. My bad. So let's go ahead and add that. Let's wait for this to work itself through configuring projects, because then it'll give me the nice little button here where I can go do that. All right, looks like it's basically done, so I can go edit starters. I'm going to add the Spring Web dependency, because I am going to build a little REST API in front of what we're doing here. All right, so there's our dependencies. I'm going to make one small change to the build.gradle file. I'm going to choose M2. Now, why it picked Spring Cloud Function Web, I don't know. I'm not going to worry myself with it, but there we go. I'm not going to take advantage of that, but we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to change this to M2, though, to Spring AI M2. And the reason for that is that there are some changes to the Relevancy Evaluator that were made between Milestone 1 and Milestone 2 that make it a little bit easier to work with. So that's what I'm going to use. All right, so I'm going to let Gradle do its business while I come over here, and I'm going to write the simplest thing I could possibly write. I'm going to go off and create a question record. It's going to just be a record that carries the question. I mean, I could just pass this in as a string to our controller, but I like to carry these things around in records. It just makes it a little bit easier to work with. And eventually, if this were to grow into a bigger application, I could possibly add more fields to this or more properties of this and give it additional context in addition to the question. But for this scenario, we're just going to simply have a question with a string as well as a similar answer that it carries a string. Okay, now that we have those, we're ready to come over here and create our controller. It's going to be ask controller, which is what I always name the controllers for lack of a better name. It's going to be a REST controller. And here's the important part. I'm going to say ask controller. I'm going to inject into it a chat client builder. Helps if I could type builder. So I'm going to call it chat client builder, and it's going to do this. It's going to create a chat client by just calling build on this. Now we could call other things to customize how the The chat client is created by calling other methods on the builder before we actually call build, but this is going to be good enough. But instead of assigning it to a local variable here in the constructor, I'm going to say this.chat client, and then I'm going to say create a field for that, and now we're ready to use that thing. All right, so I'm going to handle post requests for ask, and you can see that Copilot is making some reasonable suggestions today. And in fact, this is a reasonable suggestion to start with, although that's completely wrong, but we'll fix it. The first thing, before I forget, I need to put request body in there because I often forget that. And if I don't do that, then it's never going to bind the body of the request. But here, now that we have that, we're going to ignore that it made some bad suggestions down here. And I'm just going to say chat client dot prompt. I'm going to call user, which passes in the user version or the user message in the prompt. This is the message that is sent on behalf of the user. And so in this case, it's going to be a very simple one. It's just going to simply be the question itself. We're going to do a call, and then we're going to say entity, and we're going to say answer.class. And what this is going to do is it's going to bind whatever the response is to the answer itself so that I can return it. Now, under the covers, there's some really cool stuff going on there. When I call entity, it's going to send it, when it sends the prompt to the LLM, it's going to send some JSON schema to tell it what it should form the answer as. It's going to come back as JSON, then it's going to bind that JSON to the answer class and then, or the answer record, and here we go. So that is about as simple of a Spring AI example as we could possibly write. I mean, we could go a little bit simpler and go with strings instead of answers and questions, but you know, that's fine. We're going to go with this. Now, before we write our real test, let's kick the tires on this. Let's see if it even works, okay? So let's hit go, and I'm going to drag while that's starting up, I'm going to drag a window over here. I'm going to say HTTP 8080/ask. Question is, why is the sky blue? Okay, and it looks like it's on. It looks like it's started up now, so let's give it a go. The sky is blue because molecules in the air scatter blue light, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so great, it gave us an answer. Cool. Let's go ahead and ask it. You may have saw it was starting to ask a different question. Just for grants, let's go ahead and do that. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? 24 miles per hour. A very literal answer. Not exactly what I was looking for, but hey, that works. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you something here. This is going to kind of demonstrate to you what I was talking about in the beginning of our video. Is when I switch over to a different model, I might get a different answer. So if I were to say GPT, by default with Spring AI 1.0 milestone 2, the default model you're getting with OpenAI is GPT 4.0. But what if I went to 4.0 mini? And there's a good reason to go to 4.0 mini. It's a very capable model to work with, and I do recommend it, but it's an order of magnitude cheaper than GPT 4.0. Now, neither of these are going to break the bank. They're very inexpensive, but you know, it's always better to even go cheaper if you can. So GPT 4.0 mini is an order of magnitude less expensive. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. All right, let's wait for it to start up, and while we're waiting, let's pull our window up. I'm going to say, why is the sky blue? And here it's talking about Rayleigh scattering, which is a different answer than we got before. I mean, it's the same answer, but a different wording of the answer. If we ask it again, we're going to get, notice we got a different answer this time. So different models potentially could give different answers each time. And so we've so far got 3 different answers to why is the sky blue. I mean, the wording is similar, but it's different. It's the sky appears blue due to Rayleigh scattering, comma, and then at that point it just goes differently. It goes where, shorter, whatever, and which causes shorter. It's a different wording. And just for grants, let's ask about the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow. And it says, what do you mean, an African or a European swallow? A much different answer than the very literal 24 miles per hour we got earlier. So you can see there's something that's not very deterministic about this. Let's try it again. Let's just see. And notice we got a different answer. It's approximately 11 meters per second, which I'm not going to do the math, but I'm guessing that's about 24 miles per hour. I don't know. Or it's just making up stuff. Either way, we got a different answer this time. So let's go write a test to verify that that the answer we're given is actually relevant to the question. Okay, so let's go back over here In fact, let me make my window a little bit bigger. I always like it when it takes up the whole screen if I can. And bear with me. There we go. All right, so let's go over here and write a test. The way we're going to write a test, we're going to start off by creating a brand new class. We're going to call it evaluation. Evaluation. I cannot type that to save my life. Evaluation tests. All right, it's going to be a Spring Boot test because we want it to load up the application context. We want it to wire our controller with the chat client builder so that it can actually use it, so we can send stuff to it. So I'm going to do a a Spring Boot test. I'm going to auto wire in here my controller. All right, so that's good. And it's okay if it's private. I'd rather not, so I can avoid the little warnings about how it's private and yet we're not setting it or anything. I'm going to say auto wired. I'm also going to pass in, while we're here, I'm going to pass in chat client builder. And the reason I'm doing that is because ultimately I'm going to need that for the evaluation test. Because see, what happens is under the covers, the relevancy evaluator does its work by asking the LLM itself to verify the relevancy of the question or relevancy of the answer to the question. Okay, so we're going to do that chat client builder in there to do that. And now that we have those two things, we're ready to write our test. So at test, I'm going to say public void should return relevant answer. There we go. And we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to say, first off, I'm going to set the question itself, just so that I don't have to keep doing this over and over, because at least 3 times, I believe, before we're done, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, why is the sky blue? That's going to be the question we test against, okay? And now that we have that, I'm going to say, okay, there's a couple ways I could test the controller. I could test it as a controller using the mock MVC stuff. I could do that, but I'm going to keep it relatively simple. I'm just going to call the controller directly call its method as if it was just a regular class and not a controller. It's just as easy to do that, but certainly if you want to, feel free to, when you're trying this out, write a mock MVC test to test it. It's just a little bit quicker if I just go ahead and get to the point by just calling it this way. I'm going to say ask new question, user text. I'm going to get back the answer. Okay, so there we go. We've just done essentially what would happen if you were calling this with an HTTP post request, but I've not done it with a post request. I've just called the method directly. Okay, so I'm giving it a question with that user text. I'm getting back the answer. Now the question of the day is that answer relevant to the question? Well, let's find out. And to do that, we're going to create a relevancy evaluator. I'm going to just call it evaluator for short. And I'm going to say new relevancy evaluator. And this is where that chat client builder comes in. Because under the covers, it's going to create a chat client and use that to ask the LLM itself, is the answer relevant to the question? All right, so here's where we go. Evaluator, evaluate, new evaluation request is what I want. And I'm going to pass in a couple of things to this. I'm going to pass in the question the user asked. This is why I wanted to go ahead and capture that in a string, because I'm going to mention it a couple of times here. I'm going to pass in that. I'm going to pass in a list, and this list is, I'm going to pass in an empty list, but it's a list that contains some additional supporting data for it. We're not going to take advantage of that here, so an empty list is going to be fine. Perhaps in my book or in another video, maybe I'll follow up and we'll talk about what you could pass in here as supporting data. But for now, we're just going to leave it as an empty list. And then, of course, I have to pass in the answer so that it knows to check that. All right, with that said, let's see. I'm going to, what did I do here? Wrong here. It's complaining about something. Cannot resolve a method. Oh, here I did it again. Evaluate. I mistyped evaluate. It's not the first, nor will it be the last time I ever do that. All right, we're going to put that into an evaluation response. And I'm going to format this a little bit better so we don't have to scroll back and forth a lot. I guess, that's not bad, but let's maybe break these up as well so we can see each one of those. There, that feels better. All right, finally, now that we have our evaluation response back, evaluation response has on it a few different useful methods. It has one called get feedback, which in the case of relevancy evaluator, I don't believe actually returns anything useful. In fact, I haven't looked in detail at the code, but I believe it returns just an empty string all the time. But sometimes it's possible for an evaluator to return some feedback, to return some explanation as to why it was relevant or it wasn't relevant. Okay. There's also a score. It's a float. If I remember right, it's a value between 0 and 1. If I recall correctly, I may be remembering that wrong, but it's the idea is that if it's 0, then it's completely off base. If it's 1, it's right on target. And if it is anywhere in between, then it's maybe partially correct or partially evaluated, partially right. And then you get to make a decision on whether or not that score is high enough or low enough to judge whether it's if the evaluation was passing or not. Now, in the case of RelevancyEvaluator, even though it's a floating point number, it's always going to return either 0 or 1. All right. So in the case of evaluation response, for what we're interested in, what we really want to know is evaluation response is passed. That's the thing that's most interesting to us. Is this thing did it evaluate as relevant, or is it completely irrelevant to the question? That's all we care to know. It's a Boolean. So to take advantage of that, I'm going to use assertions, and I prefer the assert J version of this. So I can say assert that evaluation response is pass, and I can say is true. That's what I want. But I'm going to throw in some additional information in there in case it does fail. So I'm going to say with fail message, I'm going to pass in a string block that's going to say the answer, whatever, is not relevant to the question, whatever that is. And I feel like I need to put quotes around that so that when we're reading it later on, it doesn't blend in. The question and answer don't blend into the rest of the text. All right, and then we need to pass those things in. And then once again, this is where I say answer. And also, as I said before, this is the third time I'm going to use user text. So good thing I assigned it to a string for convenience. Okay, great. We now have all this together. There's only one other thing I should have told you about. In fact, I've already done it, even though you didn't see me do it. You're probably, if you're trying this at home, you're going to want to go do this. You're going to want to say spring.ai.openai key, and you're going to set it to a key. You're going to want to go out to OpenAI, sign up for an account, go generate an API key, and set it here. But I don't actually set it here. I set it in OpenAI key as an environment variable. And actually, the reason I got away with this when I ran it earlier without setting it is I actually also have a API key called spring_AI_OpenAI_API_key. I have that environment variable set, so I never have to set this in my code. But you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to at least do what I did and set those environment variables, or you're going to want to go set it something like I've done here. Incidentally, by the way, if you want to set this up in GitHub Actions, that's exactly what I would recommend doing, is I would go create in GitHub a secret called OpenAI_API_key and set that to your API key as a GitHub secret. And then as part of your GitHub Actions, go set an environment variable in the actions called spring_AI_OpenAI_API_key. And if you do that, then your GitHub Actions are going to be able to take advantage of that and use it. So, but here I'm just going to go ahead and set it. We're not going to set this up in GitHub Actions. And so I'm going to go ahead and call that good. I'm going to go ahead and close my app, even though I don't really need to. I'm going to go ahead and close it because I just want to run the test. And here's our test. Let's run it. Let's see what happens. And it's running. And there we go. It passed. And we can see that, in fact, it passed. Now, how do we make it not pass? How do we even see if that didn't work? It judged that it was in fact relevant. But what if it didn't? What if instead of passing that into the evaluation test, instead of passing in the actual answer it gave us, we gave it a fake answer, pretending that it was the answer it gave us? The sky is blue because an invisible army of jellyfish blow tiny bubbles filled with blueberry jam. All right. Let's see if that works. What do you think? Do you think it's going to work? Let's find out. I'm going to run that test again. And it says that it failed. Let's see why it failed. It says the sky appears blue due to Rayleigh scattering. That's the answer that it got. Of course, that's the answer we passed in. We actually didn't change the answer we're passing into the message, but it did give us that message where shorter wavelengths of light or longer, whatever. It basically, it checked and it determined that this answer was not relevant, even though the message is still saying the actual answer. Well, that's interesting because honestly, I've seen something very similar to this pass, and the reason why I see it pass is because it is relevant to the question. It's not correct, but it is relevant to the question. But we'll talk about that here in a minute. But for now, let's wrap this up and do a little recap. All right, so what did we just do? Well, we created a simple Spring AI application that answers arbitrary questions. And then we wrote a test using Spring AI's Relevancy Evaluator that verifies that the answer comes back is at least relevant to the question given. In other words, did the LLM at least answer the question? Under the covers, it does this by asking the LLM itself to compare the answer with the question and determine if it seems relevant. But let's be clear, relevancy is not the same as correctness. It's possible that an answer could be relevant to the question, but completely incorrect. For example, when asking about why the sky is blue, had the LLM responded with, well, the sky is blue because a group of invisible jellyfish float high above the earth, constantly blowing tiny bubbles filled with blueberry jam, well, then that would have been very relevant to the question, but it also very incorrect. It is possible, however, to evaluate correctness by using a correctness evaluator. Such an evaluator would be given the question, the generated answer, but it would also be given a reference answer that itself is correct. The evaluator would compare the generated answer with the reference answer and determine if they are similar in meaning. Unfortunately, at this time, when I'm creating this video, Spring AI does not yet offer a correctness evaluator. But I have submitted a pull request to add one. I'll add the link to that pull request in the video description in case you miss it here in the video itself. And with that said, here's where you can get the code. Go to github.com/abuma/springAI-examples. Completely all the examples I've created along the way for various videos I've done, not just this one, you can find them there. And if you're using the Spring CLI, it comes that GitHub repository comes with a project catalog file so that you can use the Spring CLI to start your projects. Just follow these instructions that you see here at the bottom of the screen. And finally, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've learned something and are as excited about Spring AI as I am. And in case you've missed it before, here's where you can find me on social media if you want to follow along, and check out my website where you'll find things like my speaking schedule as well as links to even more video content that I've created. And of course, check out my books. Spring AI in Action is what I'm working on now, and it's already the first 4 chapters are available in early access or Manning's early access program called MEEP. Or if you're watching from the future, it may already be available in its final form. Spring in Action and Build Talking Apps with Alexa are also some great things you might find interesting. Check those out. And again, thank you for watching and happy coding.